I mean, I know we're scheduled to do an episode on it anyway, but since it's been coming up and we've been talking about social conditioning and things of that such, I wanted to talk a bit about the Matrix because it's a term I hear thrown around a lot.
Right.
You know, anyone's using it these days. Like, yeah, we got to get out the Matrix, but they never really explain what they mean by that.
Right.
So, I mean, I know it's something we've had conversations about in general, whether we term it the Matrix, the system. Mm-hmm. But what is the Matrix? What are we actually talking about there, essentially?
Well, yeah. It's a good question because, yeah, I agree. Sometimes when you use terms like that, it can become like a blanket statement, right? Mm-hmm. We need to plug out, and then it's like, well, plug out what? And plug into where? What am I supposed to do? Precisely. So yeah, I think it's a valid question, which has many layers to the answer, which is why we scheduled that in. It's like we need to do a whole episode on this, which we will definitely do. What I would speak on the Matrix is a system, right? Designed to turn a human being into a battery.
Into this.
Into this.
We like that movie.
Yeah,
we're always quoting it.
There's some great quotes in the movie. But yeah, so if you run from that perspective, it being a system designed, whether it's to, consume your energy or have your energy directed in a way which doesn't benefit you or your people, but benefits whoever is in control of the system, if that makes sense. I think one of the first things you would want to understand is that systems themselves aren't bad, right? A system itself isn't a bad thing, and being plugged into a system, so to speak, isn't a bad thing inherently, if that makes sense. The problem comes when you don't control the system, or you or your people don't control the system, and therefore the system isn't designed to benefit you, if that makes sense. So within what you might term the Matrix, the overall system, you have several systems within, right? You have a judicial system, you have a political system, you have an educational system, you have a religious system, you have all these systems. And often what happens is that what we try and do is we try to go into a system that wasn't designed or created for us and change it, or at least feel like we're changing it. So what you see a lot in the systems that are present today is we're in there and we're like, yeah, we're going to change it, whether it's we're going to march or we're going to protest or we're going to shift the story. So it could apply to the political system. Was the political system designed for us? And I speak from an African perspective, as we tend to do, or people of African descent, but doesn't mean it doesn't apply to others. So if you're hearing it, you're like, yeah, this applies, then it applies. From an African perspective, the question we have to ask is, was the system that we're dealing with, whether it's a political system, whether it's an educational system, whether it's a religious system, was it designed and created for us? Instead of going in and trying to correct it, whether it's to march or protest or change the stories, we talk about religion, talk about change the stories to apply to us, which might be an important process in your consciousness elevation. At a point, you might have to read the biblical story and apply it to us, or find the way that it traces back to us. But you have to graduate beyond that at some point and say, okay, let me just go to what was originally designed for me. So that's the difference. Rather than going into a system and saying, I'm going to change this system so that it works for me, I'm going to change. It wasn't designed. You try and create your own system, if that makes sense. So when I talk specifically, or have specific conversations about the Matrix and plugging out, often the part that's missing is, okay, if I plug out, then what? If I plug out of the political system, if I plug out of the judicial system, if I plug out of the educational system, then what? If I plug out the religious system, then what? You have to have a different system, if that's the best word, to plug back into. So we don't say plug out of religion and then that's it. We say plug out of religion and go back to your original way of life. That's what we say as Sabians. So there has to be another step to the plugging out, so to speak. And often the plugging out, especially if it's used just as a sort of cool sounding term, plug out will leave you lost. You'd be like, okay, I've plugged out. Now what? if that makes sense, because a lot of these systems we've become dependent on, if that makes sense. So we need to plug out of the system and create systems for ourselves where we can plug into and know that this system, okay, we designed it, so it's going to benefit us, if that makes sense. And then I can go back in, if I have to go back into the system, whether it's to go back in to free other minds or help other people who look like me. I'm secure because I've got my own system to plug in. Once Neo and them were freed, they could go back into the Matrix, couldn't they? And come out at will and go back in and come out at will. Yeah. And it was different because now their minds have been freed. So they can do what they need to do within there. You know, just got to watch out for Cypher. That's all it is.
Like, Cypher was a problem.
He was a problem, right?
Those are like the worst kind of people, aren't they?
Yes, but they exist.
Who are aware of the system and like, you know what? I'm comfortable here. Yeah. I'm going to be an aid to it.
Yeah.
And bring my people down.
Exactly.
Sell them out.
Sellouts. But these are real. There's a real application to that character whereby you have to understand we're in a difficult fight. And so there's going to come a time where there's going to be people who are like, nah, this fight's way too difficult. I'm going to just plug in. You become so innately dependent on the system, you fight to protect it, right? I'm just going to plug in. Whether it's religion, we spoke about how people are so ingrained in the faith and belief that they react with such extreme reactions when you try and question the faith or question God or so on and so forth. And it could be the same for the financial system, for the political system, any of the systems. It could be the same. You react in such a way like, nah, because you've become dependent on it. And the thought of plugging out of that is going to be a scary thought, because where do you go? What do you do? If that makes sense. So the majority, if not all of our lives are controlled by others, by people who don't look like us or who aren't for us. Certainly at the creation of said system weren't for us. Therefore, we're dependent on people to live. Even the food we eat, we're dependent on others. Mm-hmm. So you have to create a method whereby you're dependent on yourselves, or where we are dependent on ourselves, if that makes sense. So there's a book called A Nation of Our Own, part 1 and 2, that Baba Yanun wrote. And within that book, he actually speaks on exactly what we're speaking on, plugging out of their systems, whether it's plugging out of their gods, their religions, plugging out of their political system, plugging out of their educational system. All of that is necessary in order to free ourselves, if that makes sense. So in answer to the question, when you speak about, okay, well, what exactly are we talking about when we say plug out the matrix? It's plugging out of their individual systems. And I would say that the difficulty in that is that we haven't created a foundation ourselves whereby we're going to plug out and actually go into something that's going to benefit us, if that makes sense. So
I guess, I mean, it's going to take time as well. That's important to know. When we say plug out, it's not as simple as plugging something out a plug socket.
Right.
It takes time because we've been so dependent on the system.
Exactly.
Not to be like... Yeah, like we say, everything takes time. It's not going to be an overnight thing to undo what's been done. Not to say we're just here like, yeah, we're completely plugged out and it was easy.
Yeah, and we're free now. And all you guys who aren't free, which is what you find is another step of control, right? It's people who think they're free or want so badly to be free that they start attacking others because they feel like they're in a deeper spell than they are. It's like, yeah, I'm free. You guys ain't on this. You guys ain't ready for this.
I'm off grid.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're not.
You're not off grid. But that's literally where it would begin. Until we create the fundamentals ourselves, how we live, food, energy, power, land. Until we get the fundamentals ourselves, language, culture, the fundamentals ourselves, so that, okay, we've got our way of life ourselves. We are dependent on ourselves. This is where Baba always says, live for, of, and by each other. Until we're doing that, it's going to be very difficult to then plug out of any other system, because we need systems to survive. You create a system or you create a way of life for everyone to benefit and prosper. What I would say is I think the first place it starts is in the mind.
Free your mind.
Yeah, free your mind. That sounds like we just quoted the movie. You know? I think the first place it starts is in the mind, because that's where you talk about social conditioning. That's where we've been conditioned first. It's a mental conditioning, right? You speak about you know, what we spoke about in terms of the mind's eye, right? Making you, subconsciously programming you, whereby you see others, people who don't look like you, as the powers that be, as the best this or the best that, the best doctor, the best lawyer, the best this, the best that. And that's so important, because if you don't mentally picture yourselves or view yourselves as able to take care of yourselves, then you're going to forever plug into the system, right? Even when you get certain knowledge, you know, and that's what I found in going through life. So certain people they know the system isn't designed for them. They know it doesn't benefit them like a better system could. But subconsciously, they're like, well, but that's the authority. They're in charge. Subconsciously, not consciously. You consciously say it, and they're like, no. But subconsciously, no, I can't really see a way where we could do the things that they're doing, because you've been programmed to believe that we cannot take care of ourselves. So I would say the first unplugging happens in the mind. Once you mentally view yourself as the best person to take care of yourself, then you'll begin to say, okay, I don't need their education. I don't need their teachers. I don't need their politics. I don't need their this. And we create a nation of our own.
That's so true. Yeah. It takes a certain will as well.
It does.
A certain will to say, I want better than this for my people.
Exactly.
Because most people are just trying to survive day to day. So they're not thinking about the future of our people. So it takes a certain character and will
to do so.
To fully acknowledge that and make those moves.
And that's a fact. And that's a fact. And you just have to remember that it does take a fight. And it's by design. That's why they have us so distracted. But when I say distracted, it sounds like, it sounds simple. It's more layered than that, you know, because it's easy to say, right? They have you distracted with your job. If you got a 9 to 5, distracted with this, distracted with that. But you're, from your individual perspective, you're going to say, but I need those things to survive, right? So it is a group thing. We can't, it's very difficult for an individual to free themselves by themselves. That I do acknowledge. It is much easier if, as a group, we say, listen, we're tired of relying upon this system or these systems. A good example is our education. I think the educational system is fundamental to what we're explaining about freeing your mind.
Because it's where they get us first. It's where they indoctrinate us first.
That's where they start. So your religious system and your educational system. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the religious system. So we'll speak about educationally. Today is if a large enough group of us got together and said, we're tired of the educational system, we're going to educate ourselves, we're going to educate our children. You solve a lot of problems in a generation. You'll solve a lot of problems in a generation. But that's a difficult thing, it seems, for a lot of people to do. Or maybe most people don't realize the importance of it, because they'll have you, and it's simple things. You're so ingrained in, I got to do this, I got to work, I don't have time to educate my child. I'll send them to the school, and they grow up that way, and they've been miseducated, or at least not educated to realize their potential. They've been educated to work within all the other systems that you see, whether it's the work system, financial system, so on and so forth. So they've been groomed already to go into that system. Therefore, it's going to be difficult for them to later on in life say, let me plug out of this system. That's all they know. That's all they've been taught. That's what they know of survival. So that's a good example where you just say, if a group of us got together and said, we're going to control the education of our children. This is why as Sabaeans, we speak of how important it is to make sure we're speaking our language from early, to make sure we learn about our deities, the ancestors that have come before us, what they've achieved from early, what we're capable of. So as a child, you already know. Your educational system, so to speak, has provided you with the facts of who you are, whereby you're not going to grow up conforming to a certain way of thinking, because that's where it all starts. If you have enough people thinking freely, so to speak, all the fundamentals will happen automatically. You'll see us move already and make sure that we're controlling our food, controlling our land, controlling our culture, controlling our language. That will happen if you've educated them early and therefore freed the mind, freed the mental, so to speak. So yeah, I hope that provides something. Like I said, I think there's certain details that you want to go into. That's certainly I want to go into when we do the episode on the Matrix. But yeah, that's what I would say. I said, I think I mentioned it already, A Nation of Our Own, Part 1 and Part 2. I would read those books.
Fret, Chafe and Worry. That was a good one as well.
That's a good one. That's a good one as well, part of that scroll. And these books speak of just plugging out of the systems and plugging in, and what would be required of us as a people to do to make sure that it's safe. You're not just plugging someone out and then leaving them. Like, okay, yeah, you know that this, that, and that is bad for you, but what's good for you? You know, so I want to get that across. Systems aren't bad. It's that we don't control or didn't create the systems that we're in. Therefore, they're not for us. But other people that the system was created for, they do just fine. They're doing great because it was created for them. You know, so we got to create the systems that are good for us, or create the way of life. I use that word in this context, create the way of life, the environment, the programming that is good for us, if that makes sense. Because the mind absorbs everything from a young age. So as soon as you come into this world, you are being programmed, so to speak. That's how you learn. Everything you see, you're picking up, and that's what you absorb, and that becomes a part of who you are, if that makes sense. So therefore, you have to control the programming, because you can't stop the programming. You can't stop a child learning, can you? You have to control the program, you know, hence you control it, which ties in phonetically or word-wise with the program they watch on TV. You know, you watch what is good for you to watch, what's good for you to absorb. So yeah, I just think that's a good point to make, because often words like system and program get a negative connotation as our consciousness grows. We're like, yeah, no systems, no programming. That's going to happen by nature. You just want to make sure it's the right program for you. You know, and different people on the planet are going to require different programs for them to grow. You know, we have different vibrations and different natures. So yeah, I hope that helps. Definitely. Practically speaking, if that makes sense.